Hello, BookTube. I, as you know, am a co-host on a BookTube event called GarbAugust, which is taking place all throughout August. We have a week left to go of reading trash in the month of August. It was created by Ollie at Criminality. We have a great group of co-hosts, and one of the aspects of GarbAugust that I have really liked, uh, perhaps almost in isolation, certainly in isolation to the extent that I do it, is this kind of Jesuitical pondering of what the elemental elements are of trash. How do you know when it's trash? I resist the easy reduction of I can't define it, but I know it when I see it. I resist that. I would rather have definitions, even if we disagree about them. I think they're fun to try and define these things and talk about them like that. So it's another example today of trash talk. Now, I have done a GarbAugust video today, but I want to do a trash talk video too because someone emailed me, I think it was 2 days ago, and asked me, this person said, I am just out of college and I majored in some sort of barbaric scientific thing or other. But once they left college, their love of reading rekindled. And they have been watching some of my back videos and some of Michael K. Vaughan's videos on canonical authors. Michael K. Vaughan just recently did one on Thucydides. I have a whole series of the Western Canon Starter Kit and also the Daily Penguins. And this person watched a lot of those videos and was just, the enthusiasm just caught fire. Yes, I never encountered these, and I trip over them all the time, these canonical figures, when I'm reading other things. They are there, and I don't know them, and I could. And your videos and some other videos have given me the inspiration that I could get to know these authors. I don't need to go to school for it, which is absolutely true. That was the whole point of the Western Canon Starter Kit, is that you don't need to go to school to learn to know and love these authors. Obviously, since they've been known and loved long before people went to school for them. And this person said, watches my channel, I'm very grateful for that, and said, you know, I feel this way and I'm all on fire about these authors, these great authors, but I've been watching GarbAugust, your videos and everybody else's, and it's really tempting me. I'm sure there's a lot of garbage at my library that I could explore, and you all make it seem like so much fun, but should I do it? When I've got these great authors to read, should I do it? And I fired off a quick response, but I thought about that a lot. Should you read trash? It's a kind of an unspoken question at the back of GarbAugust just to start with. Should you read trash at all? In an event, a BookTube event designed to celebrate garbage, we sort of skip over that as assumed. But for a lot of people, it's not assumed. And I realized when I thought that I never questioned, not for a minute, whether or not to read trash, whether or not trash should be an active part of my own reading. Long time ago, trash worked its way into my reading and stayed there. It stayed there. If you are early bitten with Barsoom or Hyboria, you don't go back. You're going to keep going to those and things like them. Or Star Trek. You're going to keep going back to those things no matter what else you read and no matter how else you appreciate what you read. So I never had a problem with that, but some people didn't have that and now are coming to reading late and realizing, well, I've got a path before me. Do I stick with, Xenophon and Euclid, or do I slice off some time or maybe even a lot of time for reading trash? In this way, my co-hosts and I bear a heavy burden that perhaps we have not examined. We are tempting people to read trash. And when I thought about that, I thought about other decisions. I have never faced this decision. I wouldn't get rid of cheesy, pulpy trash in my reading diet for all the tea in China. But some people have, and whenever I've encountered a big problem like this, a question, serious, a path diverged in a yellow wood, I make a list of pros and cons. I know that is a very Donegal housewife thing to do, but I find it actually helps a lot. It's a simple thing, but I find it helps a lot, provided you aren't making your list of pros and cons like a foot-stamping teenager, a 13-year-old, where you're saying, pros, none, cons, I hate it. That's not going to do anybody any good. What you have to do is take an internal step back and actually list pros and cons. There have been times in my life when I was facing a decision of one kind or another where I honestly had no idea whether to turn left or right and just left it up to the pros and cons. I would make a list of pros and cons and literally pick the one that had the highest number in whichever category. No, it's not always true. Usually the pros and cons list is designed to inform my decision making rather than make it for me. But I thought, what would happen if I made a pro and con list about whether or not you should read trash? So I did. I've got it on the iPad mini here. And we're going to see how it shakes out. So we'll start with, well, in South Boston Irish Catholic way, we'll start with cons. We'll start with the con. Con number one, it's trash. By its very name. That means very little work went into it. And so it stands to reason you'll get very little out of it. It is the literary, the book world equivalent of empty calories. That's a con. I know in the 21st century that might not seem it, but that's a con. But then the next pro that I came up with is the biggest one of all, which is that it's fun. Mostly fun. If you find trash that's written joyfully or earnestly, but in a way where the earnestness carries the day, and you love it, even though the whole time you're seeing its shortcomings, that is joyful. It is a wonderful, fun experience to read a great piece of trash. And, as I've pointed out in GarbAugust, as I pointed out many other times on BookTube, as I pointed out many times in my reading life before there was a BookTube, the whole point of reading is to have fun. The whole point of reading is to enjoy yourself. I know that might seem a little odd coming from me, considering some of the abstruse stuff that I read and enthuse about on this channel, but they're all kinds of fun. None of those things are duty. Well, some of them are because they are literally duty. I'm literally being paid to read them, but most of them aren't. Most of them aren't at all. Most of them, a 1,000-page, abstruse, heavily annotated biography that's in translation, they're all kinds of fun. If that's well done, that will be amazingly fun for me. Not all fun has to be cheap. Not all fun has to be easy. And trash is fun. Good trash is fun. So that's a pro, and that's a pretty big one. Don't you think? Huh? You have to be so gentle, baby. What you doing? What's on that mind of yours? I'm talking about trash. You're not trash. Do you want to come down? There you go. So anyway, we'll move on from that pro. That was a huge pro, but there's no grading system here. It's one pro, one con. So we'll move on to a con, and it's a big one, which is that even trash takes time to read. Most people read between 20 and 50 pages an hour, and most people have at most an hour a day to read. I know that those numbers will be skewed a little for BookTube, but we've got it really bad. I mean, I think we can all agree on that, right? We've got it really, really bad. Most people who still read, which is a very small percentage of the population, but most people who still read don't have it quite as bad as we do. So realistically speaking, they've got a job, or maybe two jobs. They've got a spouse that they haven't murdered with tasteless, odorless poison in the tea. Although, word of the wise, that doesn't work on manatees. It just makes them horny. They've got kids that they haven't abandoned at the dump. They've got personal hygiene. They've got all sorts of exercise routines. They've got all sorts of family obligations. Friends. They've got friends. They wear pants. Most people who have encumbered their lives with all that stuff, if they are well disposed to reading, and a lot of them are, the most they will do is 20 to 50 pages an hour for 1 hour a day. And I would argue that a lot of those people, the people who don't have it bad, most of the people I think who are listening to me now, not only read, but consider reading and books to be an absolutely essential pillar of their life. And what we tend to forget, those of us who are like that, is that there are a huge number of people in the world who like to read, but it's not a load-bearing column in their life. They just like to read. You might know some of them. I know some of those people. It's always a mystery to me why you don't just go whole hog on this particular thing, since it's so incredible. But they do exist. And people like that, they don't have a lot of time. Even you, even the rest of you who read, probably 50 to 70 pages an hour, and for longer than an hour a day, don't have a lot of time. You are visibly older to me today than you were yesterday. And the end of your life is coming up so fast, you would not believe it. You would not believe it. Right now, most of you would think the passage of 50 years is going to feel like 150. It's actually going to feel like 5 minutes. You're going to look back from that period and say, where did that time go? No matter how actively and satisfactorily you're using your life. In other words, in about 10 minutes, you're going to be dead, which means this is a pretty big con. Trash takes time to read. And because it's trash, you are probably going to get a lot less out of it on the first read, certainly, than you would a seriously, thrillingly done work that has quality. A great novel, or a great biography, or a truly, take your brain apart and put it back together work of biography or science or something like that. Trash is on a different rung. I don't think anyone in GarbAugust is claiming it's not. It's very enjoyable, and there was, pro number one, which is that's the whole point of reading. But it's not the same amount of enjoyment, and you only have so much time. So that's a con. It's that, no matter how easy trash is to read, it still takes time, and your reading time is extremely limited. If my reading time is limited, yours is limited. But then we'll move on to a pro. And I jotted it down here, and that is that it makes those other kinds of writing better, more nuanced, more realized, fully realized works of literature. It makes a lot of those qualities stand out. Reading trash does. It can actually sharpen your ability to perceive and appreciate works of quality, works that aren't trash. It can actually have that effect. It has on lots of people. It has on me many, many times. You read, like I mentioned in a couple of videos recently, you read a piece of trash and you're thinking, well, such and such an author would have done a better job here. And that makes you think, that makes you start to think about why they would have done a better job, how they would have done a better job. And that's critical thinking. That's you suddenly thinking about how a book comes together. Fiction is, I guess, largely what we're talking about here. But it works in all cases. So it throws non-trash into sharper relief. That's a pro. But then we have a con. And this is one that you're not going to like to hear in the 21st century, where all is licensed and nothing is forbidden and nothing is wrong. That's not true, but in the 21st century, if someone says you're doing something wrong, your first impulse is not to sit back and consider whether or not they're right, but rather to sue them and destroy them on social media. And that is simply a wrong response. And so the next con is reading trash is habit forming, or it can be. I've had this objection, for instance, 5 or 6 years ago, the vogue was for adults to read nothing but YA at all. Just YA all the time. Books written for children. That fad has largely started to wane, but you don't have to look far on BookTube to find it still, and I'm sure that it still exists in the wild, of fully grown bourbon binging adults who call their subscribers vermin when the camera's not on, but when the camera is on, they do cartwheels and scream at the camera about how much they love, a quart of thorns and peppermint or whatever. It's simple one-dimensional stuff about which of the two boys the girl is going to pick, and yet it's all that they read. And in the time, back years ago when that was at its heyday, I criticized it not because I was trying to police what people read, but because I was trying to warn other adults that if you only read this stuff and you read nothing else, you're going to reach a point where the muscles that are able to read more complex stuff for your own age or older atrophy. Where they don't just weaken, they atrophy, they die. And suddenly then you're not able to read Madame Bovary. So you're 28 going on 30, and you're no longer able to read Madame Bovary. You're no longer able to read The March Up Country by Xenophon. You can't do it anymore. And the reason I know that I'm right about that, I knew I was right about it before because I've known a lot of readers in my life, but I've seen it. I've seen that admission from so-called big booktubers who've been concentrating on reading or skimming or not reading or claiming that they read YA fiction exclusively for the last 10 years. And they've made videos where they simply admit that they aren't able to read Shakespeare anymore. They can't do it. They would have to relearn those skills from the ground up, and who's going to do that? In between vape hits, who's going to do that? Nobody. So this is a pretty big con. If you read too much garbage, if it's the only thing you read, if you never leaven it with anything that had any kind of thought put into it or revision put into it, it can be habit forming, and that habit is really bad. It's to your detriment as a reader. It means you're closing off vast areas of reading that are, as I mentioned, more satisfying to read. Doesn't mean that trash isn't fun, but non-trash is more satisfying in the long run and the short run. And if you read only trash, too much trash, that could hurt you. So that's a con. But the next pro is near and dear to my heart, which is that reading trash prohibits, or inhibits anyway, snobbery. Right? If you are reading solar-powered sluts of Saturn and enjoying it, eagerly turning the pages, you're going to find it hard to play at being a literary snob the next time Ishiguro's name comes up at a cocktail party. You're going to know, even if no one else does, that you have that dirty little solar-powered secret in your closet. It inhibits snobbery if you read widely. That's true anyway, even if trash is no part of your reading diet. But if trash is a part of your reading diet, it's really hard to turn that around and be snobbish about it, and be snobbish about anything else. So that is a real pro, but it leads to a real con. Because let's say you have a tendency inside you, and not a lot of people watching this channel do, I think, but some readers do. Let's say you have a tendency to snobbishness, to snobby behavior, trying to make other readers feel bad about what they read. If you have a tendency and you keep that under control, and maybe reading trash inhibits that a little more, the fact that it inhibits that tendency a little more is a pro. But the thing you do next is a con, which is that it leads a lot of people to say, well, if I am a sort of an inner snob, if I do think I'm right about everything all the time, and I like this thing, then maybe it isn't trash. Maybe it isn't actually trash. Well, actually, where do mansplainers go to drink? Well, actually, maybe it isn't. It's a quick step from the one spot to the other. And the place that some people end up when they do that is the place that I hate most of all, obviously, as I've said many, many times. And as I was expecting to come up on GarbAugust more than it has. And that place is, it's all relative. It's all subjective. It isn't all subjective. And when you get to the point where you're thinking, well, I like a lot of the right stuff, but I also like some of the wrong stuff, an easy temptation for people in that position is to say, maybe the stuff they like that's wrong isn't wrong. Well, actually, maybe it's all subjective. Or maybe there are hidden depths to it that I'm don't have really time to explain to you right now. But if you'll subscribe to my Substack, I'll gladly go on. So that's a con, is that it can lead you to it's all subjective, and anything that gets you there is bad. And then we have a pro. The final thing, a pro is for reading trash, is that it's inviting. In a directly participatory way, it's inviting. Especially bad trash. Trash where you read it and it may have some atavistic elements of enjoyment in it, but it's mostly bad. You're reading it, and as I mentioned, you're thinking, a more talented author could really do a lot more with this. I'd be enjoying this a lot more if the writer was simply better at his job. Reading enough trash, or reading trash that's bad enough, will up the ante on that response to not some other writer, but me. You'll be saying, I could do better than this. And that is inviting. In a perverse kind of way, trash can be very inviting for the budding writer inside you. And I would argue there's a budding writer inside every one of you. It shouldn't be budding anymore. You should be trying it. We should all be writing buddies for NaNoWriMo. But that's an effect that I've seen trash have on people, including people who went on to have writing careers of their own, specifically because they were goaded in exactly that way. They read a piece of trash and thought, I can do better than this. And they were right. and that doesn't happen when you're reading The House of Mirth. When you're reading something like Housekeeping, the last thing on earth you're thinking when you're reading a book like that, you may not like it, or you may not love it, but the last thing on earth you're thinking when you're reading, Joseph and His Brothers or something like that is, I could do better than this. No, no, you're not. Books like that have been known to make budding writers flee for the hills or hide under rocks. It's trash that brings out that response of, why don't I start writing? And I like that response. Anything that will bring out that response in people is fine by me and counts as a pro. But if you've been keeping track, unfortunately, you realize that the number of pros and the number of cons is equal. So we are right back where we started. We have listed a few pros and cons for reading trash or not reading it, but No one heading comes out ahead. It's a tie. Don't expect me to be the tiebreaker. I've been dealing with this question my whole life. So I guess the most, since we didn't have a winner, the most that this video can do is give you some pros and cons to think about. We're right back where we started. We don't have a resolution to the question, should I read trash? I'm afraid you're on your own. And that's my trash talk for today. But I will see you soon. Thank you.